Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And I was so engrossed in those wonderful presentations, I have to say, that it actually caught me by surprise that it was my turn to stand up. And I have to say, I'm really delighted that the day has privileged practitioners and your experiences of innovation in your practice, because that's what's really, really important. And I'm sure that everyone in the room today has really learned so much from having the opportunity to engage with you and your practice and the work that you've done in your services, because, you know, that is really where listening to our peers and what they're doing and finding out in their practice is much more powerful than any of the messages that I or maybe those of us who are more involved in the policy or academic world can really share with you. It is inspirational to see what can happen in practice on the ground. But having said that, I'm really conscious this is Saturday afternoon and it's a beautiful spring day, and probably the first where we've seen so much sunshine. And we are a little bit behind time, so I'm going to condense what I have to say to you. You'll be delighted to hear into a bit of a shorter presentation. And hopefully then, when we do have the opportunity to have maybe some reflection time and some questions, if you have any burning questions, I'd be really happy to answer them. But as I say, I'm going to kind of condense what I have here. I suppose really the opportunity to be here with you today, there are a couple of messages that I really would like. I mean, oftentimes I think when we are sitting in these kind of scenarios, there's often one or two things that you take away with you that sort of resonate with you afterwards. And I would love it if you get a chance when you're thinking about this later or next week or into the future, that you remember these one or two key messages that I want to share with you today, because I think that they are much more important than me giving you lots of facts and figures and details about what we've been doing and where we've been. And as I said, you have wonderful examples of practice from your fellow practitioners that they've shared with you today, and I couldn't put more eloquently the kinds of professionalism, commitment to being an innovative and exemplary early years service than these practitioners have done today. So I'm not going to even try to do that, to do that with you. What I want to do with you today is and I'm going to skip over a number of slides, so don't panic if you see me jumping across them, because I'm not going to. Is it just the return key? I'm just going to jump across, but just to really, for a very quick moment, I'm just going to remind you of the fact that we are very much still the new kids on the block in the early years sector, even though we do feel a bit aged now and the grey hairs are starting to show after almost 3 years of activity. I suppose where the genesis of early years education focused inspection came from was the whole idea in 2013 that we needed to start looking at process quality. Hands up, many of you who know what process quality is. Goodness me, I'm surprised. I would say you are all delivering on process quality every day. What process quality really is talking about the interactions, the processes, the relationships. That is what process quality is about. Structural quality often is what we're very familiar with, and structural quality is around how the environment is, how children's health and safety. I suppose it's what our colleagues in TUSLA would be inspecting against in terms of a compliance type inspection. But we in the Department of Education were asked to come up with a framework for inspection that would be focused on inspection for improvement around process quality. And that was in 2015. In 2016, we signed off on our framework model, and as I say, this is the document, the blue document with the pink banner, that contains all the details of what's in our framework for inspection. And we began this only in April 2016. Inspection for improvement is somewhat different than a compliance inspection. And I suppose really the most important aspect of inspection for improvement is that it allows us to engage in something that we really feel very passionately about, and that is respectful engagement through professional dialogue. And that's what you're doing in a way with children when you engage with children and ask them about what they like and what they want to see within their service. That is respectful engagement with children. because you're involving them in the decision-making process and negotiating with them around what is possible and what may not be possible within that early years setting. What we do in our inspections is bring the same principle. We model that idea of respectful engagement, and we recognise your professionalism, your funds of knowledge, to quote again that wonderful phrase, your funds of knowledge and what you bring to the delivery of a high quality service. But I suppose what I just want to, before I get into the detail of the sort of key messages that we found, I just want to say that we are still a very small team. To date, out of 130 odd inspectors in the Department of Education, there are 15 of us who are early years inspectors. And we have a full country to cover in terms of our inspection workload. So we're very small, perfectly formed, I have to say, because I've got a few of them sitting in front of me here, but really challenged to bring this very different type of inspection experience to services across the country. However, we've been busy, and to date, even with that small number, that small team, we have completed over 1,200 inspections. And that has allowed us at this stage to sort of get some insight as to where we are in relation to a number of dimensions of practice that are within our inspection framework. And I will share with you, just before we conclude today, a couple of those insights in relation to the two topics that you've been talking about today, the provision for children's healthy eating and also for outdoor play. If you're interested yourself, there is a fabulous resource online of our inspection reports, and they are at that web address. And you can search through all of those at your leisure, and you can read about the wonderful practice that exists right around the country in early years services. And there, believe you me, there are some really interesting and innovative ideas out there if you take the time to have a look at the reports. In fact, I got paid a compliment recently. We have one of our colleagues who, unfortunately, due to a degenerative disease, has lost his eyesight over the last number of years. But he acts as an editor, and he looks at inspection reports across the early years, primary and post-primary. And recently he came to me and he said that the early years reports were the only ones where he could see the practice that was happening within the services, because they were so authentic and so rich. And that is something we try to do. We try to make them authentic and unique to each early years service, and to describe what we see as authentically as we can. But this is one of the key messages I want you to take away with you and think about, because I'm standing here today and it is actually something that I sort of sometimes feel, still like pinching myself over, because I, like yourselves, have been around in a space which today is called early years, but for many years was called childcare. Then we had early childhood care and education, and now it's early years. But what it wasn't really in the hearts and minds of most people, apart from ourselves, was education. It really wasn't. It was about occupying children while their parents went to do something more useful instead, usually. And for me, I want you to understand, if I can say nothing else to you today, that the establishment of early childhood education inspection in Ireland has begun, and it is still fledgling. We're only a couple of years here. It has begun to raise awareness of the fact that education does not start when you walk through the doors of a primary school. That it begins from the moment that child comes into a family and is part of a wider family, community, and maybe a centre-based service or a child-minding service, or indeed your own services in the diversity that you offer. So I just want to say that we need to start understanding that there is a way in which we are now regarded in the wider context of public services that hasn't been there to date. And I always remember when the free preschool programme was initiated in 2010, we had a conference in Dublin Castle, And Professor Chris Pascal from the University of Birmingham was there talking when the minister announced this, wondrous initiative. Now, ironically, it was the recoupment of money from a direct payment to parents that got us the free preschool programme. But anyway, she said to the audience, she said, it's wonderful. This is as groundbreaking as free post-primary or secondary education would have been in the 1960s in Ireland, to have free universal access to preschool education. But, and she warned, be careful about what's going to happen next, because with greater investment of public money, there is going to be greater requirement for accountability. And I think that we, in our education-focused inspection, are trying to take that quite seriously. Because the next thing she said was, you have to be accountable. You don't have a choice. This is public money. You have to be accountable. But you can engage in a conversation about what that accountability will look like. What are you going to be accountable for? And how is that language going to be made relevant for the work that you do in early years services? And that is what we've tried to do in early years education focused inspection, is that we've brought the language of ASHTR and of Shielta into an inspection framework that is saying to the wider education sector, this is what we will be accountable for. We will be accountable for the processes that we put in place to support children's learning and development. We will be accountable for ensuring that those processes are based on solid research evidence, on best practice, and that they result in children and families really having a positive experience. And that's what the framework language says. But here's the thing. Since we started 2 years ago, we are now beginning to see our colleagues in the primary and post-primary contexts, and even in further and higher education contexts, beginning to understand or to ask questions about the relevance of what we do for what they are doing. Because we're there now, because we're in that space, because we are putting forward these ideas, because we're saying the things that matter to children's learning in these early stages. And it's quite interesting to see now that rather than education pressing down into the early years from the primary and post-primary sectors, that our colleagues are starting now to ask us for advice around how are we going to engage young people in post-primary schools who have real issues around their mental health and their well-being. What are we going to do to try and engage them and support them, because they're really struggling? And there's many of you here today who might know a young person who really is having issues around their own ability to persist in their learning, or to be self-motivating, or to have a sense of self and self-esteem. And oftentimes, myself and my colleagues in the early years can wave our hands and say, yeah, we could help you there, because oftentimes in the early years, we understand those challenges and we have strategies that work with very young children, but funny enough, they also work with older children as well. So what I'm basically saying is that our challenge is to understand our places now within a wider lifelong learning agenda. And that goes from when the child first engages outside that family environment with a centre-based service or with a childminder. And it is really incumbent upon us now to understand our role as educators in that continuity and that experience. So if that's one of the only messages you understand today, I hope that you can really begin to reflect and think about what that means then for us in terms of moving forward with our own agenda around articulating what we understand to be best practice for children. For example, on the issue of school readiness, we are also now talking about ready schools. Are schools ready for children who are coming from, which hopefully in the next couple of years, sometimes might be up to 2 years within a preschool environment. Or if they've been in full daycare from they were babies, it's a lot longer. So those children will bring very different funds of knowledge and experience into that primary school context than maybe the previous groups who didn't have the opportunity to have those experiences. So it starts to raise issues that, for the first time, really transform our thinking about lifelong learning and the role of the early years sector. So, having said that, I'm not going to go into the detail of some of these slides now. I've already spoke to you about we focus on improvement and process quality. Our framework is informed by Ashton and Shielta. It is very straightforward. It's on one page. There are 20 outcomes and 4 areas. We don't go into complex details. We do have signposts for practice. And those signposts for practice just allow our inspectors and you to understand what we might look for. They're not comprehensive. They don't talk about everything we might look for. They just allow you to see some idea of what we might be looking at when we come in to talk to you. The focus on process quality is really about, as I said, relationships, interactions, creating a strong sense that this is our place for both the adults, the children, and their families. We are really, really invested in this idea of the professional, reflective adult, which is why all of the previous speakers, I think, really resonate with what we are trying to achieve within our role. And as I say, we're all working together to achieve the outcomes because we want to engage with you from a professional point of view so that we can have those conversations that are reflective, that we can listen and understand what it is you're doing that really is responding to the needs of the children and to the unique context in which your service operates. As I said, improvement through professional engagement. As we understand, I won't go into the detail here, and those of you who are interested can read. There's some references that I can provide at the end that allow you to read in more detail. But it is really important for us that we work in a collaborative way in relation to this inspection for improvement approach. It won't work otherwise. As I said, our framework has 4 areas: the context for children's learning, the processes, and very importantly, and it is unique in this regard, the quality of the children's achievements and experiences themselves. So we want to really engage with children and find out from them, what is it like to be in this service? What is it like for you? And then, of course, really importantly, the quality of the management and leadership for learning. And I can't underestimate that challenge because that's right across the education system. That idea of leadership for learning. And that's not just about managers. That's about every individual has a potential to be a leader for learning within an early years service. I'm going to skip over these because these are just the details of our areas. What I want to say to you is what we look at in relation to health and well-being. And these are our signposts for practice. So they're not extensive and they're not exclusive. There are others that I'm sure we could add to this list and we might do over time. But these are just some of the things that we look at in relation to the areas that you have been working on. And I wanted you to see these because I want you to know that we agree with the work that you've been doing. And we will reinforce and support you in this practice. So, for example, we want to look and see the extent to which snack or meal times are seen as a social occasion, an opportunity to promote well-being and a healthy lifestyle. And I think you could see from some of the images, the videos, and the materials that have been shared outside that these services that have presented and shared very bravely, I have to say, because it's not an easy thing to do with you today, are really well on their way to making this a reality for those children in their services. That children have regular access to the outdoor learning environments. It is absolutely no surprise, I would say, to anyone that if you give a camera to a 3-year-old child and ask them to photograph the aspects of their environment that they love the most, all right, hands up and tell me what the top 3 things are. Anyone? Outside, they take photographs out the window or out the doors. What's the second thing? Sorry? Water taps. Yeah, they featured, all right. Friends. Their friends usually come in as second. And the third one are usually pets or the natural environment. They often take photographs of animals or plants or trees or flowers. Anyway, that's just an aside. So children want to be in the outdoors. They love it. I mean, I'm sure you've all had the experience of having a really busy morning and then, break time comes and you can almost feel like it's a pressure cooker which has just had the top opened and the steam rises and all rush outdoors and the noise level dissipates. All of that pent-up energy. Children love being outdoors. We all loved being outdoors when we were children. So why wouldn't they? And also these are, that these experiences enhance them and give them the chance to develop their physical fitness, their fine and gross motor skills, to understand their boundaries. All of those things that everyone has been talking about today, we will reinforce and support when we come out to talk to you when we are out on inspection. So, I just want you to take, that's the second key message. We are there with you. We want to reinforce this practice, we want to support it, because we understand and we know that it is in the best interests of those children in your service. We also, and I've included really importantly, that we are also connecting these issues around healthy eating and physical health to children's mental health and their mental well-being. Because as you could see from, some of those photographs and videos, really an awful lot of, particularly the children who could vocalize very well, those older children from the school-age childcare, there was a real sense of, I want to be able to serve myself. I know how much I can eat. I know what I like, and I'm sure they have great respect for the practitioners in their service, but what they were saying was, trust me, and I will do it for myself. Now, when somebody does that to you, trusts you to be competent and do something, and you feel a sense of achievement, what does that do for your sense of yourself? It makes you feel good. And that sense of achievement and that sense of feeling competent breeds further competence. And it breeds the idea that I could maybe push myself a little bit further the next time and try the broccoli or try the pasta with the vegetable sauce. I might just be brave enough. So it is all connected. It's not just about children's physical health, it is definitely about their mental health. So I'm going to just skip forward. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we saw in our inspection over the last year. And I have to say that by and large, we were very positive about what we saw when we were out in services. What we did see was there was such warmth and caring environments provided, really in great intent to engage children in secure relationships with the practitioners who were in services. Really positive. There was also, a really positive intention to form good relationships with parents and families. But a lot of the time, we were suffering from our natural, the opposite of affinity, our natural difficulty with the outdoor environment. And a lot of the time it was about the adults, not about the children. Children loved going outdoors, regardless of the weather. Yes, there was the odd one, because by that stage they'd probably been told, if I go out, I'll get wet, I'll get a cold. But mostly it was the adults who did not enjoy being outdoors. And we could go into all sorts of reasons of why that is. In area 2, which is our area around processes, around interactions, we did see that there were provision for playful, exploratory learning. And, play is something that we unashamedly promote. And I know that there are many who feel that, that is not in line with their ethos and the way in which they deliver their service. But playfulness and playful exploration can happen regardless of your professed curricular approach. It doesn't matter whether you call yourselves Montessori or Steiner or high scope or play-based or that you use Ashter. We are not judging on the basis of what your declared curriculum philosophy is. We want to see how that translates into those positive learning experiences that are allowing children to have playful engagement with natural materials in the natural environment that really supports their learning and development. So we don't preference any particular approach. We look for these underpinning processes. And then just very quickly to finish, we also really want to understand how we can support you in relation to leadership, management and leadership for learning. Because I have to say, this is one of the areas we found that a lot of people are finding challenging, unsurprisingly. We're an evolving sector. We're really only coming to grips with the fact that we are now in the policy spotlight, so to speak. And with it, that accountability agenda seems to be overwhelming at times. And how you manage that with the increased expectations around what you will engage with in terms of children's learning and development and families can be very overwhelming for many, many people. But it is undoubted that where we have been in services where there has been exemplary practice, there have been exemplary leaders. And I think you can see that even today. We have seen some exemplary early years leaders here today, giving us an example of what can be achieved when you have someone who will take that team forward, who will take the risk of getting into those messy places in the swamp and saying, what if we did this? And taking the risk of it maybe going well or maybe not. And that's the kind of leadership that we need to foster and develop within our services. Our next steps, and as I said, we have a lot going on in education. And I just want to show you this because the early years is now in every educational strategy that is being published. So you guys are in all of these, believe it or not. The digital strategy, the STEM, anybody know what that is? Science, technology, education and maths, yeah? And recently we've had our minister, and I think he's going to be in Limerick in his next tour, and he's going to be talking about how he really passionately believes that creativity and also that those critical curiosity, those exploratory skills are fostered in the early years. So science, technology, education and maths, early years are in there. Creativity, Creative Ireland, they're in there. Our sustainable future, we're in there as well. And we've been in literacy and numeracy for learning and life for a number of years now. So there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot going on. But what I can say to you is that we are there with you. We will be there as an education inspectorate to inform and advise you around how you can really take that challenge of supporting the early education of young children forward in a way that is going to be meaningful for them and is going to enable them to be fully ready, and also the schools to be fully ready to receive them on the next stage of their learning journey. We will be continuing our inspection programme. Some of you might have met us already. This year we'll be starting more follow-throughs, which is after a year when your report has been published. We'll come back to see how you've got on. We come back any earlier than that. A lot of services have told us it's too soon because they really need some time to reflect and think and implement. We'll also be working with our colleagues in TUSLA to try and create a more coordinated approach and more coherent approach. And we'll be publishing composite reports which tell you more about the different aspects, how are we getting on with outdoor play, how are we getting on with relationships and interactions. We will have a new guide for September, and it will have lots more detail around what we'll be doing, and we'll be consulting with you on that in May. So keep your eyes out, and I really look forward to engaging with you, and hopefully you have some questions for us if we have some time for reflection. But other than that, thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again.